Hi, I want to welcome you to the Synod of the Covenant preaching workshop for this month, for August 2025. Welcome to those of you who are here in person on Zoom, and welcome as well to those of you who will be watching this later on YouTube. We're really excited to have Carlos Perkins with us today. I'll introduce him more fully in a second, but first I want to share some things that are going on in the life of the Synod. Let me share my screen. And if you can tell me if you can see that yet. Marianne, I see you. Kevin, I see you. Do you see what's on the screen yet?
Yes.
Blank.
Great, great. Thank you.
There we go.
Here we go. We want to give some money away to people in your churches and to your church. So our two ways to do that. The first is our scholarship program. These are scholarships for associate's programs, vocational school, undergrad, and first theological masters. We give away $50,000. The amounts depend on how many applicants we get, but in the past they've ranged between $750 and $2,000. The students do not need to be going to a Presbyterian college or even a college within the bounds of the Synod. They just need to be part of a Synod congregation or part of a college ministry that's within the Synod. So we would love to give your students some scholarship help. So please apply. You can find information on our website, and they are due on September 2nd. And then the grants program is our Matthew 25 grants program. We give grants up to $5,000 to congregations and other Presbyterian ministries to help them make progress towards congregational vitality or for work against systemic poverty or structural racism. Those applications are also on our website. These are for churches and Presbyterian entities within our Synod, and these applications are due on September 30th. We also give away $50,000 for these. So we hope that we can support your ministries and your students. Wanted to let you know that Ruth May, who is here, she had her picture off. I'm not going to ask her to put her picture on unless she wants to, because you never know if people are ready to put their picture on. But Ruth May is about 2.5 months into her ministry as the Associate Executive for Racial Justice for the Synod. She's doing a great job. Her role is to help connect leaders of color and congregations of color, and to support and equip them and learn from them, and then also work with all of our congregations towards anti-racism work. So she would be so glad to help your presbyteries or help your congregations or help you if she can do so. As I said, she's off to a really good start, and I know that you will appreciate your working with her. Next month, I'm going to be leading the workshop next month in September on preparing to preach Advent 2025. And then Tim Slimmons will lead it the next month. He's from Dubuque Seminary on charting a year's course through the scriptures. So how do you use the lectionary? He has actually developed a year D for the lectionary. He'll probably talk about that to include other scriptures that aren't in the A, B, or C. And then he'll probably also talk about if you're doing sermon series or any other approach that's not using the lectionary, how do you schedule yourself for the whole year? And then we have our lectionary discussion group, which is on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month from 10 to 11:30. Heather, our office manager, who's a graduate of San Francisco Seminary, hosts it. You can contact her for information about it. And she tells me that Bob, who is here, is her, oh no, I'm sorry, it's not Bob. It's another person there that's kind of her partner in crime. Although Bob, I think you attend that also. We'd love to have you stay in touch with us. The best way to do that is through our website or our newsletter. If you don't already get our newsletter, you'll hear about the things that I've talked about now, as well as other things. It just comes out once a month. You can sign up at synodofthecovenant.org/contact. You can also find and follow us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. On YouTube now, I think this is the 41st preaching workshop. So if you have a title or a subject that you want to learn more about, chances are there's some kind of program on our YouTube channel. So please check that out. And then here's my contact information. I'll put this in the chat too, in case you would like to be in touch with me for any reason. Stop my share, and I'm excited to introduce to you Carlos Perkins. Carlos is an assistant research scientist and the associate director of engagement in the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at the Lake Institute of Faith and Giving at Indiana University in Indianapolis. I wish that there were an acronym that would capture all of that, all of those words, but he is eminently qualified to lead this workshop today on preaching about stewardship. He's an ordained clergy with the African Methodist Episcopal Church and is senior pastor of Bethel Cathedral AME Church, which is the oldest Black congregation in Indianapolis. Did you tell me, Carlos, from 1836? Yeah, from 1836. So that's quite a legacy. Prior to joining the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving, Carlos served as principal with the Metropolitan School District of Pike Township in Indiana. So he's got quite a background. We met at a Lilly gathering 2 years or about a year and a half ago. I took his card and have waited for this day when he could give this presentation. It must have been maybe February of 2024 or March of 2024. So the day is here, and I'm really glad, Carlos, that you're here. And let me pray for this time, and then we'll welcome him. Gracious God, thank you so much for this chance to learn from Carlos. I pray your blessing on him and his ministry. We are so thankful for his presence with us. God, as we talk about and learn about preaching about money, about stewardship, about generosity, we pray, God, that you would help us to hear what you have to say. We thank you for all of the experiences that you have given to Carlos along the way, all of his insights that he'll bring to us. We give you thanks for this time together, and we pray in Christ's name. Amen. So let's do some happy hands. Let's welcome Carlos with some happy hands. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Chip, and good morning to all. Thank you for the opportunity to share this morning. I am going to jump right into the work because I have a packed PowerPoint, but I also want to afford opportunities for us to ask questions and have a discussion. There are parts within the presentation where I'll invite the wisdom in the room, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I am honored to do this. Let me share with you that I am sitting in a hotel room in Raleigh, North Carolina, getting ready to teach our executive certificate in religious fundraising starting at 1 o'clock today. And I'll talk a little bit about our executive certificate. So I have a lot in my head today, and hopefully we'll get it out in 60 minutes and it will be a blessing to you. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And if it's easier for you to put your computer in presentation mode, that's okay. Whatever works best for you works for me. And so I will do that. All right, I think we are right there. The title of this presentation is Preaching Generosity, Reflecting on Theologies and Distinct Cultures Around Giving and Generosity. As Chip shared, we are part of the Lake Institute is a part of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at IU Indianapolis. We are the Mature Institute, one of the oldest institute within the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, along with our fundraising school. Prior to us becoming a school, we were a center. The Lake Institute has been a part of that center, now school, for the last 22 years. The Lake Institute really sits on three core areas: research and scholarship, and you will hear and experience some of the research that we've done through the Lake Institute and some of the research that we are currently engaged in. And we also offer support for research scholars around the country, our doctoral scholar dissertation scholarship. We also offer support for students both in our undergraduate program, our bachelor's program, our master's degree program, and we have two doctoral degree programs, a PhD and a PhilD within the School of Philanthropy that the Lake Institute offers scholarships to candidates that are part of those programs. We offer education and training. This is a part of our education program, workshops that we do across the Lilly orbit with organizations that are involved with the endowment, but also organizations that we have partnerships with. The education portion, we offer two main educational opportunities: an executive certificate in religious fundraising. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And which is the executive certificate is really geared towards faith leaders and pastors that are leading congregations. And then we offer a seminar called Cultivating Generous Congregations, which is geared towards the faith leader and lay leadership within the congregation. It is our belief that in order to do generosity well, in order to cultivate generosity within your congregation and community, that it's more than the responsibility of the leader, the laity must also be involved. And then we offer public conversations around our Lake Lecture series, where we invite somebody from the global community to come and talk to us about current trends in giving and generosity, a particular topic that we might find to be useful that particular year. This is an annual event. But we also offer other community of practices where we bring together smaller groups of individuals to discuss a particular topic or particular emphasis in generosity and giving. Earlier this year, we sponsored a symposium titled Philanthropy and the Black Church, bringing together Black church leaders and philanthropic organizational funders to have conversations around what that looks like in our context and in our current season that we are in. To talk more specifically, and you'll get a little bit of taste of this, of the executive certificate, there are two ways in which we offer this. It is an online 8-week course or an in-person experience. We oftentimes partner with our partner organizations to offer in person. That's what I'm doing right now in North Carolina. We are partnering with the Raleigh Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance in Raleigh, and we're looking forward to about 40 pastors and faith leaders starting at 1 o'clock today. But we offer online courses, open enrollment courses through the Lake Institute website that we invite you, if this is of interest to you, I want to encourage you to be able to tap in and be a part of one of our courses. We also have a free resource that we offer to faith leaders. It is a resource library. It is a space where we have created open access articles and tools for congregations that are looking to go deeper in the discussion or dynamics between faith and giving. Congregations that might want to, pastors, faith leaders that might want to have a discussion with their leadership team around some innovative way of thinking, creative ways of using facilities, creative ways of engaging with community. There are tons of articles, short articles that you can use as a part of your leadership meeting, as an assigned reading, to help to just kind of spark some innovations. We have been able to do this over the last few years to collect articles from across the wealth and breadth of a different religious orientation. And so we invite you to check it out at lakeinstitute.org. You'll be able to access that free resource. Let me jump right into the work today. After we just finished my commercial, let's jump into this a conversation about reflecting on theologies and distinct cultures around giving and generosity. As I shared with you, our practice when we do workshops and our classes is that we believe in the wisdom in the room, which is from the 16 of us that's online right now, and for the individuals that will watch on YouTube, that we believe that you have practices within your own context that others can learn from. So this is my invitation to you to lean in at any given point when invited to come on in, unmute yourself, and be a part of the discussion. That's the way that we believe that learning happens for so many of us, that there's wisdom that you have that you can share with your colleagues. And this is the first opportunity. And so I'm going to invite you into the space to think about and share with us What's the worst money sermon that you remember hearing? What's the worst money sermon you remember hearing? I am going to stop sharing now so that we can see each other, and invite you to unmute yourself. And if I see you unmuted, I'll try to identify. If not, come on in. What's the worst money sermon that you remember hearing?
Oh, the first one that came to mind for me was actually in my first church. The senior pastor left under not so great circumstances and used his last Sunday as sort of his hit list of all the things that the church needed to fix. And the vast majority of it was basically just ripping the congregation for the
Mm.
ways in which he felt they were not as generous as they needed to be.
Oh, wow. Oh,
It was
wow.
not good. Yeah, it wasn't good.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So that was his final stand.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Wow. Thank you, Edward. Anyone else? What's the worst money sermon you remember hearing?
I can honestly say I think I put them all out of my memory. I don't have any memory of any of them even.
So you try to flush them out, Robert. Try not to remember them. Not necessarily a sermon, but even maybe a workshop in a religious context. What's the worst money sermon or workshop that you remember hearing?
I don't know if I say worst, but whenever I hear giving to church equate to giving treasures, to the heaven. I mean, that automatically giving to church equals to giving to God, that I had a problem with all along.
So the connection between being generous or giving to the needs of the congregation and how that is connected to giving to God. Okay. Anybody else?
Automatically, I mean, that we can surely build the connection, but if you give it to church, then you're giving to God automatically.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Chip.
This is kind of the reverse. I don't remember hearing that many bad ones, but I'm amazed how many churches I talk with where a new pastor will say, the former pastor never talked about giving. So it's not so much that it's almost the problem is less that there was a bad sermon, but that there was no sermon.
So no conversation at all about generosity and giving. Okay. Go ahead.
I was gonna, Ruth, I may, yes. Nice to meet you, Carlos. Just along the lines of what Chip was saying, that's what I've experienced among churches. Pastors in general, and there's research about this, don't like to talk about finances. They don't, I mean, I'm generalizing, but they are afraid of engaging in the conversation, of asking for money, dealing with money, managing money, and then they just relegate that to the finance committee or one or two people within the congregation. And my other comment is outside of the Presbyterian Church. I have had congregants come to me and say, "Oh, I listen to this televangelist, and what they do and what they say, and they invited me. Oh, you should pastor. You should look at this one. You should look at that one." So I don't want to label them as worse, but I want to share the comment of there might be also some denominational understandings about finance that are different from other people, that even people that are in our congregations that are Presbyterian members are still exposed and they still consume preaching, non-Presbyterian preaching. I don't like that language either, but outside. And I don't want to label it, but it doesn't sound like a sermon. It sounds more of a business model of I have a formula and I capitalize on your emotional needs. Therefore, you give me money, and then so I wanted to share that.
Thank you,
Carlos.
thank you, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Carlos, I don't know if this is helpful. I'm going to take a risk with you. One of my mentors, Dr. Mays, sat down with me one time, and he was telling me about a pastor sat down with a parishioner. He says, John, if you had $50,000, would you get half of it to the church? Well, Pastor, I would. And John, if you had 50 pigs, would you get half of it to the church? Well, of course, Pastor, I would. Well, John, if you had 2 cows, would you give one of them to the church? Now, wait a minute, Pastor. You happen to know I have 2 cows. It hits close to home.
Yeah.
It's deeply personal.
Yeah.
And that where I think we get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I hope that's helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you, Kevin. Because oftentimes, and I'm going to go to the next slide, oftentimes when we think and hear, so I've heard so many sermons around the Malachi text, will a person rob God, yet you withhold your tithes and offering, right? And it's more, I think what Ruth was sharing, more an appeal to the emotion and trying to make individuals feel guilty around giving, right? So there is an appeal to the emotion and a guilt trip around giving, right? And we're going to get to a conversation where we talk about kind of this traditional paradigm in giving versus this emergent paradigm. But I want to jump back to the slide and ask a second question for us to think about what is, and okay, come on, we're doing this, there we go. What's a meaningful or memorable element you remember from a preachment, Bible study, or workshop on generosity? And I think, Kevin, you started this for us, right? That it is deeply personal. What is a meaningful or memorable element that you remember from a preachment, a Bible study, or workshop on generosity? I'm going to stop sharing again and just invite us to come back into the room. So Kevin highlighted that it's deeply personal. That is one element of it. Anyone else? Go ahead, Ruth.
I'll start us. That too. So with the Presbyterian Foundation, they started changing the language of stewardship, or adding language and enhancing the language from stewardship to generosity. And this was 7-8 years ago that I was exposed to that, and having that shift from stewardship of having an understanding of, we just want to receive money, but to be generous, and generosity as a response, as a faith response, and a response of gratitude for everything that God has given us. That has helped me engage with the ministry of money and financing in a different way. And the second this one was about 15 years ago. Reverend Dr. Claudio Carvalho, he preached a sermon at a church event, and he invited the audience to think about what happens, what we ask of our congregants when we pass the offering plate. And he shared that he was a pastor years ago of a poor Brazilian congregation. It was immigrant, they didn't have money. So he decided, he felt that how does he invite the congregation to think about the ways in which they can give and offer themselves? So he talked about, he opened the floor, and a person said, well, I do the lawn, I do gardening, so this is my gift to the congregation. So upon the offering section of the worship, I am going to put a note, and I'm going to offer the church that on Mondays and every second Tuesday of the month or whatever, I'm going to offer this. Well, I can cook. Well, I'm going to do this. So those are two ways in which I've heard help me kind of reframe and appreciate stewardship and generosity and finance and giving differently.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's take one more. What's a memorable element, meaningful element that you remember from a teaching, Bible study, preachment on generosity? Grace?
Thank you. When the workshop led to examine our priority of the life and aligning our spending of our resources according to our priority, then our spending is, we are not passively, like when the needs come up, we are not dragged by the money, but we can allocate kind of using our resources based on our priority and how that aligns with the church ministry into it.
Absolutely. Thank you. So oftentimes when we share with pastors, we share that as you interrogate your own theology around money, around generosity, around giving, what are the things that help you as an individual? What are the things that have informed your own personal theology? What are the scriptures? What are the practices? What are the experiences that you have had with money that has helped to form your theology? And so I think somebody mentioned that there are some pastors that don't preach about it at all because they have a tentative relationship with money. It's not a place of comfort. And so we oftentimes encourage pastors to interrogate that for yourself. Why aren't you comfortable talking about money? Because scripture talks about it, right? And we know that we need finances to be able to do the ministry that God has called us to do, right? We also oftentimes encourage pastors to think about money through our definition. We use a sociological framework to define generosity as a part of our work at Lake. And Kristen Smith has a definition that says that generosity is like the other virtues. It must be cultivated. And so you think about the other virtues that you preach and teach about. What are some of the virtues that we preach and teach about from our pulpits? Love, right? Faith,
kindness,
kindness, forgiveness. How often do you preach about love? How often do you preach about kindness, reconciliation? And if we understand that generosity is like the other virtues that must be cultivated, just as you're cultivating love in your congregation, generosity must also be cultivated. And so it can't be a once a year when you're putting together the budget, a week-long or month-long stewardship campaign, right? Because that's not how you relegated the other virtues, right? They are all incorporated in your weekly preachment, in your weekly sermons, in your weekly Bible studies, in your workshops, right? So what does it look like to cultivate, to have generosity as a part of that, if we understand that is a trait that must be, is a virtue that must be developed? Let me go back to the PowerPoint. And jump a little bit into the statistics for us to look at, right? Right, there we are. This particular graph helps us to, and again, we are, some of us are living this reality now, right? We see it in our congregation. We see it in our denomination, where church membership among U.S. adults is now below 50%, right? So you see the decline from the 1940s all the way into 2020. We're now into 2025, and that number is continuously going down. So in 2020, 47% of U.S. adults belong to a church. What does that mean for us? Is you look at religious affiliation by year of birth, right? Between some of our wisdom keepers, the 1920s and 1940, compared to 2000. Individuals that were born in 2000 are about 25 years old this year, right? And look at their affiliation within religious institutions. Look at the top line in the Protestant faith and the decline based on birth year. But look at the green line, right? Individuals that are identified as nuns, N-O-N-E, right? That they are non-affiliated, they don't have an affiliation. And that is increasing. So what does that mean for our local congregations as we continue to cultivate generosity? Decline in the percentage of household given to charity, right? So the share of Americans given to charity is 68% in 2002 compared to 55% in 2014. And we're seeing a decline even in 2025. A matter of fact, what the research shows us that there are less people that are given more. Overall, given to philanthropy or charity has gone up, but there are less people that are given more. So what does that mean for you as your leading congregations, right? What does it mean as we are cultivating generosity within our congregation? We try to share this slide because oftentimes we have this idea of what section of the country is more generous. 50% of U.S. households donated to charity. And you can see the breakdown in the different regions across the United States. I want to jump into a conversation real quickly that talks a little bit about the different types of givers, right? So we talk about generosity being like the other virtues that must be cultivated, but who are you cultivating, right? And how do you cultivate generosity within your context, right? What are the theologies and how are those theologies informed by scripture, by our own personal experience, by our own orientation around money, right? And our own orientation around our community and congregation. I love this slide because it oftentimes engages in a rigorous conversation. Research done by two of our professors at IU, Herzog and Price, published back in 2016, identified four types of givers. Four types of givers. And as I'm describing each type, I want you to think about the type of giver that you are and the type of givers that are in your congregation. The first type of giver that's on the upper left-hand side of my screen is an impulsive giver. That are these individuals, they give spontaneously and giving just happens, right? So they might be moved by the moment. They might be moved by a sermon or an event or activity. They might be moved by an experience they have out in community. They might see a young person and they have an orientation to give towards young people, and they just give. They are impulsive in their giving. The second type of person, of givers that Herzog and Price identify, are selective givers that are situational and they are conscious about their decision. So they are very selective as to how and what they give, right? I use myself as an example as a very selective giver, right? That will probably give to any kind of international missions work. That is just a part of my own orientation. That is something that speaks to me and my call in ministry. And so I oftentimes will give very selectively, very consciously towards a particular thing. Then they identify a habitual giver, right? An habitual giver has routines in how they give, right? It might be the individuals that they give regularly, but they give through a system, right? It is their habit, right? So they might set it and forget it, right? They might be the individuals that will, select that this year I'm giving to 4 organizations, and I'm going to give it through the online program. And if you don't have an online program, then you might not get the gift. I sometimes fall in this, especially when I go to an open worship service. I don't travel with a check. I very rarely have cash because my wife and children will take it if they see it. And so I'm going to give online. And so oftentimes, if you don't have an online platform to give, I probably will not move to give because I have to figure out how I'm going to get it to you because you don't have it in the system and I can't get it there. The fourth type of giver that they talk about is a plan giver. A plan giver is very conscious about their decision, and they make in their mind exactly the amount that they're going to give. And oftentimes, no matter what, they might not move from that planned gift. These are the individuals oftentimes that will complete your pledge card because they know for the year they're going to give $12,000, $1,000 a month, and that's all you're going to give. So, Pastor, I don't care what you say. I've written the check for $1,000. I've made the transfer for $1,000, and that's all you're going to give. So I'm going to stop the screen, and I'm going to invite us wisdom in the room. Where do you think you fall in these 1 of 4 types of giving as defined by Herxaw and Price? Where would you orient yourself?
I think in general, I'm planned,
Okay.
but I tend to be spontaneous as well, like impulsive. But I think the rhythm and the ritual and the part of kind of planning out a long-term giving for a variety of things is important as like the foundation. And then there's a variety of impulsive opportunities that I like to give to and kind of, I don't know, it's almost like the having a nice base and then having fun with like the impulsive giving in a sense, right? Where you feel moved by something, right? Move, like you said, moved by the moment, right? And so I think having both to me is important. If I only do one, I don't give enough, or I give more than I can afford. And then if it's not planned, that gets me into trouble and I forget to. So
I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to push you a bit to think about, and I'll come back after. I see Mary has her hand up, and I see Kevin is putting something in the chat. I want you to think about what are some of the things that you are more impulsively given to, right? Because I think it will speak a little bit to your orientation. Mary, come on in.
I'm just about the same. I plan a certain amount and I give a certain amount, but I set aside a certain amount for something that hits me and impulsive, and it is a joy to give that way. And to designate impulsively, I agree. It's fun, and I think it helps us to understand that there's more that we can do. And so if in fact something doesn't hit my heart in that month with that amount, for that amount, I can then put it someplace else or put it back into the planned amounts. But it is a joy to be able to give. And, as I'm talking, I'm thinking as well, it's a joy to be able to give, even a planned amount. And so I think we should kind of look at it that way too, as a joyful act.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. I want us to think about, I asked the question, where do you place yourself? I want you to think about the community in which you're serving right now. Where would you place majority of the individuals in your community? 3. Grace says 3. So that would be habitual. More habitual givers. Anyone else? Where would you place planned? Kevin said most individuals are planned givers.
I'd say habitual and planned, but also not thinking about the fact that more and more people are impulsive and selective.
Okay. More and more people are impulsive and selective. Okay.
I would say in the congregation where I am now that it's definitely toward the systemic side, the habitual and the planned. That certainly matches our demographics. But it's kind of, as we've been talking today, it seems like a lot of us have kind of a left-handed and right-handed, one stronger thing and the other one. My guess is not many of them cross diagonally on your chart. But we also have quite a number of people who are impulsive, that if you put a very obvious immediate need out that didn't work its way through the annual system, there are some real generous people here too.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg. There's a question in the chat around whether or not this varies by generation. Absolutely. Right? We dig a little bit deep into our executive certificate when we look at generational giving, and the desire for the younger generations to be attached to a clear mission and vision. What is your organization doing for community? Right? Chip, come on in, and then we're going to jump to the slide to share what their results are in terms of different types of giving. Go ahead, Chip.
I'm thinking about the kind of give. This is really helpful for me because I suspect that we preach in the same way that we preach sermons that we would like to hear. We tend to preach the kind of sermons that we ourselves appreciate rather than the kind of sermons that trying to give a variety of sermons for everybody in the congregation where people get a different style regularly. I suspect we also preach about money according to the way that we think about giving ourselves. And so I happen to be a planned giver that wishes that I were not also a spontaneous giver or whatever. Like every time I give something, I'm always like, I'm going to give this much. And then it's like, I hear something like, I guess I'm going to give a little bit more to this, but I'm heavily planned. And I think I preach as if everyone is heavily planned. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
That is one of the takeaways from this. We oftentimes preach and teach from the place that we give.
Carlos, just 1 second too. Somebody asked me if you'll make the slides available after, and I couldn't remember what you had said about that.
Absolutely. I'll get those to you as soon as we're done.
Okay, and I'll forward them to everybody.
Yeah. Right. So I echo that. Absolutely. We preach and teach from the place where we are. And so if we're plan givers, exactly what you said, Chip, we oftentimes preach and teach from a plan given perspective. But look what the research says, right? And that will help to inform us a bit, right? The research says that 42% of individuals identify as impulsive givers. So if 42% of the persons sitting in front of you on a Sunday morning or Wednesday afternoon or Saturday morning, right, are impulsive givers, but you're preaching and teaching from a plan-given perspective, right? How are you reaching and cultivating them? The question that was asked around generational giving, oftentimes Gen Xers, Gen Zers and especially alphas, right, are looking for a reason to give, right? They're looking for what is the connection to community. They are what we oftentimes categorize as emergent within the emergent paradigm, right? They don't subscribe as much to this theology of duty or this moral obligation, right? So to preach the theology of duty is to say, hey, it is a part of your responsibility as a part of this congregation that you contribute to it, right? They are looking to be cultivated and be connected to the mission and vision of your organization. So as we think about our theologies and how we preach and teach generosity and how we're cultivated, right? So look at the slide. It's a 16% of planned givers. So you understand that if you build a stewardship program around pledges, right, and your response rate is only 16%, can you build a true annual budget from only 16% of your individuals responding, right? So how do you not fall into the space where you're missing the opportunity to cultivate those that are sitting in front of you? To push the discussion a little bit, okay, I see your hand, Julie. We'll come on in. Let me get to the next slide and then we'll come right to you, Julie. The next slide talks about the frequency of teaching about generosity. So if we know that 42% of givers are impulsive, yet only 35% of pastors preach and teach about generosity on a yearly basis, and 8%, they don't do it at all. This comes from our study, the National Study of Congregational Economic Practices done by Lake Institute in 2019. We are repeating this study in 2025. We're in the midst of this study right now to update some of this data. But from our 2019, only 35% of pastors identify that they preach and teach about generosity on a yearly basis, right? So what does that mean about cultivating? If we agree that generosity is like the other virtues that must be cultivated in individuals, preaching about it once a quarter or not at all might not lead to really cultivating the generosity that you want to see in your congregation. Let me stop the slide and I'm going to come to Julie to hear what our question is. Come on in, Julie.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, like thinking like, I'm preaching every week. So like, you get kind of in your mode, but so when I go to another church, you can kind of see different things. And I was thinking the last time I felt like really moved to give at another church, I was at Southside Presbyterian in Tucson for their Migrant Sunday. And it was, they're a church known for their migrant ministries. And it was just like, it was so moving that I just like wanted to be a part of it. And I don't remember really any big ask, but it was really like thinking about my generation of like, it was really about the mission and vision that was just so exciting. I wanted to be a part of it. And this was the small way I could be a part of it because I was leaving, you know what I mean? And so just thinking about like, what's the balance between like preaching and talking about generosity versus just having like a really exciting vision and mission that people want to be, people want to be a part of.
So you said something powerful, Julie. You said that the congregation that you visited is known for their migrant ministry. A clear congregational call, right? So going in, you already knew what the congregational call is. So they might not necessarily do a direct ask, but it's a reminder, some point during the worship experience, that this is what God is calling us to do in this season. That is beyond us, beyond the four walls. It's not, we need to fix the AC. The AC still needs to work. It is not to pay the light bill. We still need electricity. But it is a clear identification of the call of the congregation. I see your hand, Grace.
Thank you. My question is 2 slides back when you show the percentage of givers like close to 50%, 40-some% impulsive giver, and we approach to only planned giving way. But if I want that data is for the general population of all the givers, and in is congregational exegesis, how much percentage of my congregation is actually more leaning toward the planned giver or impulse giver. So there may be some gap in that part. And my second question is, when we say the preaching about generosity, it might be 4 weeks a year or only the stewardship season. But throughout the year, like you say, that tapping into the church's specific ministry, that call for generosity, I think we are more throughout the year doing that. Many churches I've seen that too. So how bring the message into specifically in the preaching might not as frequently, but the call for the generosity might be like more frequent than we think we are preaching about.
Yeah. Thank you, Grace. Let me address the first question that you raised. So this is a national research, right, with the American Generosity, Who Gives and Why from 2006, and with the Herxall and Price, right? We encourage faith leaders to exegete your own congregation, right? To know your own giving patterns, right? One of the exercises that we practice within the executive certificate is the pyramid exercise. It's the pyramid of giving, right? When we take a look at a congregation that has 100 members, and if you run a given report, research suggests to us that 10%, the top 10% of your givers in your local congregation gives over 54% of your annual income. If you add the next 20%, you're up to about 92%. So 30%, if you have a congregation of 100 persons that gives, 30 of those individuals gives over 92% of your annual budget. And I know I shared that with my congregation, and I ran the numbers for them, took the names out and just one through whatever. And it was a bit stunning for them. But the first response was, why are we listening to these folks that don't give? Was the first response, because they're oftentimes the loudest, right? Can you be honest, right? My response as their faith leader is, hey, this is a great opportunity for us to cultivate 70% of our congregation, because 70% of our congregation gives less than 10% of our annual budget. Right. So what work do we need to do in cultivating that generosity? Right. So I want us to sit on that a little bit. Your second part of your question, Grace, is around oftentimes we might be preaching and teaching more frequently than we know. Right. My encouragement to faith leaders is that it becomes intentional. Right? And it starts with work with us. That you can't dread a stewardship sermon or a stewardship series, right? And if you do, then how do we interrogate that to see, why is this so difficult for me, right? Because you know what? As we shared earlier, you're probably going to teach and preach from your own context, from your own perspective, but the folks will also identify quickly that pastor is not comfortable with this at all. And so how do you work on your own level of comfort? I'm going to jump. I see a couple of comments coming in the chat, and so I'm trying to manage a couple of them. Can generosity be cultivated on a weekly basis during worship service and other component of worship other than preaching? Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? I oftentimes talk with pastors about, what does your generosity moment look like within your worship service? How and what are you inviting individuals to partner with God on? I don't want to give too much away because I would love to see some of you in the executive certificate program. But one of the books that we use is a book by Henry Nouwen called Fundraising as Ministry. It's a short read. And Nouwen says that religious fundraising is not begging. It is an invitation to others to partner with God on a vision that is exciting and engaging. The question is, do you have a vision that is exciting and engaging? What are you inviting others to partner with God on? Come on in, Kevin.
Am I coming through?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. We're dealing a lot with the intellectual process of giving.
Uh-huh.
However, we've got we've got a situation. Let me back away from that. And where some of the benefits are going to be cut, they're going to be reduced. We've got people running scared.
Yes.
What am I going to have enough? I empathize with 70% that don't give. How do we help comfort my people to have them feel that God will be with them and they will have enough? It's a trust issue, faith, obviously. How do we bolster that? Because it seems to me feelings are kind of what people make decisions on.
Absolutely. So I love that because I think you raised that earlier, right? When you talk about that generosity and giving is personal. So I can conceptually see it if it's a big picture, but once it becomes close to home, right? Am I still generous? Let me share with you this next slide that I think will help us a bit as we are navigating through this. So Walter Brueggemann talks about money and possession, right? And I love this because it helps us to walk through a thinking around money and possession. Walter Brueggemann says that money and possessions are gifts from God, right? They're gifts from God, whether that be 2 cows or 1,000 sheep, right? They're gifts from God. That we receive them as rewards for our obedience. That as stewards, that we receive those gifts as rewards. But they are God's own belonging that are held in trust by you and I in community. No matter what it is, whether that be plenty or not as much, right? They still belong to God. Money and possessions still belong to God, but they're held in trust by us. He also says that money and possessions are sources to address social injustice, right? So I love the example of going to a congregation that you clearly know that their congregational call is to work with our immigrant community, right? That they're doing justice work. But he also says that money and possessions are to be shared in a neighborly way. And ultimately, that money and possessions can potentially lead to idolatry. It can lead to idolatry. It can lead to idolatry. Not that money is bad, but the love of it, right? And understanding or operating as if they're not gifts from God, that they're not God's own that are entrusted to us, that they're not used to address social injustice, and that they should not be shared, it can lead to idolatry. So as we think about what God has called us to do, right, and how we preach and teach about money and how we frame a theology around money, I want us to think about Walter Brueggemann's definition of what money and possessions are. I want to drop one more thing before I open up for discussion, because we are right about at time. And so I'm going to jump through.
Carlos, we have another half hour.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah,
So we have time. All right.
Yeah.
Good. So in thinking about that, right? Oftentimes when I think and talk to pastors and faith leaders, right, of really juxtaposing this compelling preaching versus a fundraising stewardship ask, right? We already discussed that it's not only during the preaching moment that you can cultivate generosity, that there are other opportunities for us to be able to cultivate generosity within our local context. One, understanding our call, our congregational call, both as a place of moral formation, and many of us are doing this very well. We're doing the work, the Matthew 28 work. We are doing the work of helping to form our congregation, our individuals into disciples. The question is, are we also doing our nonprofit work? Are we transforming community in where we are located, right? And a part of inviting and cultivating generosity is not only to do the moral formation, but is also to do the nonprofit work. And so I want to leave just this is one of the tools that we use during our course. It is this year-round cycle of giving. This year-round cycle of giving. As you think about your theologies, as you think about your practices, as you think about cultivating generosity, some clarity around telling your story. How do you tell the story of what God has called your congregation to do as you're cultivating generosity, both within the membership, but also those that might be connected to your community? Right? So do you have a clear mission and vision? Right? Clear mission and vision statements. Do you have a case statement, a case for support? Right? Why individuals might want to partner with you and the vision that God has given to you. Oftentimes we find this very difficult in the work that we're doing in our religious institutions. Right? Why should I make the case? The case makes itself. But how do you articulate across generation what the mission and vision is, right? And why it warrants philanthropic support? How do you tell your story? And tell the story in a way that you're demonstrated impact, right? Not only in the programs and ministries that you do, but in the worship experience, right? How do you tell the story of members of your congregation that have been transformed as a result of being a part of the congregation? And how do you do this through preaching and teaching? And so as a part of the cycle of giving, we're not only telling a story, but we're also generating an ask. What are you inviting individuals to give to? Are you inviting them into an annual stewardship program? Are you inviting them to give their time and talent? A part of the definition that we used from Christine Smith said that generosity is more than money. It is time, it is talent, it is treasure, but it's also your testimony. So what are you inviting? Do you have a time and talent program that you're inviting folks to participate in? Is there a planned giving program? Is there capital funding opportunity? Is there special giving opportunities or year-end giving? What exactly are you inviting individuals into? And as you think about whether you work on a calendar year or a conference year, if that's different in my tradition, conference year runs from August to July. And so we operate, some of our congregations operate on the conference year. My congregation operates on our calendar year. So are we coming down to the end of the year and we're inviting folks to give to something, right? This is continuous, right? So this is not just one time. This is not just 1 month, right? This is not just a stewardship season. This is year round. We're evaluating and analyzing, right? We're looking at endowment planning. We're looking at capital needs planning. One of the biggest obstacles that I talk to pastors about is deferred maintenance on their buildings. And some of us, thank you, Chip, for sharing the opportunities for scholarship, might have opportunities within your denomination to connect for resources for capital needs, but how do you make that as a part of your year-round cycle of giving? And then you don't stop there. You continue with education and reflection. You continue with affirming of donors, right? Beyond your required annual letter that the IRS requires us to send out before the end of January, right? How do you say thank you to the individuals that are contributing or supporting the ministry? Because that's a part of the cultivation, right? What celebrations do you have in place? Right? That might not be at the end of the year, but it might be a 6 month. I shared last night with a group that I was sharing with that at the end of June, I sent out, I drafted a letter to all of the individuals that gave for the first 6 months of the year, just to say thank you and reflect on what as a congregation we've been able to accomplish for the first 6 months of 2025. And directly align that and connect that to their generosity. It is because of your generosity, we're able to continue to support the orphanage that we have in Haiti, right? So there's a direct connection to transformative work through individuals' generosity. And you keep the momentum going. You keep teaching and preaching. You keep the ask. You keep the learning plan, and you keep the momentum going, right? The last thing I want to share.
Before you go, Carlos, can I just
Yeah.
add an insight that I just realized is looking at that ask section. Could you put
Yes.
that back up for a
I'll
second?
put it back up. I will.
I think that I have often thought, because I'm a planned giver and I focused on planned givers, I have thought we just need to focus on the annual campaign and not bug them by doing special offerings or by asking for this or asking that, because I've realized looking at these asks that because I did that, I was missing out on giving from spontaneous givers, from the different types of givers that aren't planned, who would want to do a capital funding program or a special giving opportunity or a year-end giving, that comes up. And I am convicted that even though I like to ask for money, I don't have any problem asking for money, that I need to do it. I could do it more regularly, because by doing it more regularly, it motivates different styles of givers rather than just planned giving. So thank you for that insight.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Let me stop sharing and just invite the conversation.
And Greg had some interesting thoughts in the chat up above that we didn't get a chance to talk about. If you go up, there's a couple of insights that I thought, Greg, you might want to expound on that I thought were pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm one of those that have learned not to emphasize a stewardship campaign. In fact, I've used the phrase stewardship emphasis in the fall, but then tried to do more year-round things. But I've been at this 30 years, and I've not fleshed it out. The way that Carlos has spelled it out very well here, of that instead of sending a one-size-fits-all stewardship letter in late October, we need to have 4 different brands of it, and figure out who's most likely to respond to that one. And the other one that's my action step is, I've sometimes had a thought for the week or an inspirational thing that we printed in the announcements. I think we need to do that. We have printed announcements. We also have slideshows that work on our Facebook and that. But instead of just saying time for the offering, it would be good to say your gifts provide this. one week we do it selective, the next week impulsive, the next week habitual. Then we go back to impulsive because there's twice as many of those. And, you know, on a 5-week cycle, we hit all 4 of those. But recognizing if our congregations match the percentages that you showed, I think there's ways that we can do that emphasis. And, you know, when we have a speaker come in from the women's shelter or the homeless shelter, that's the time to hit with the moved by the moment kind of emphasis.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the practices that I've adopted, Greg, is to spend that stewardship moment within the worship service to highlight 1 or 2 of the things that we're doing as a congregation. So as a part of the course, we help our participants to define what's your home base, right? And the home base looks and sounds like, what is the mission of the congregation, right? So at my local congregation, we go by STAR, STAR. At Bethel Cathedral, we are serving, teaching, and reaching souls for Jesus Christ. They hear that every Sunday. And I might, depending on how the Spirit moves and my preparation, might highlight how we serve on first Sunday. Second Sunday, I might highlight how we are teaching. And then third Sunday, I might highlight how we are reaching, right? And I'm very deliberate in sharing the impact. Through your generosity, we were able to reach 200 young people returning to school on July 30th this year through our back to school activity. It gives the generational givers that might say, Pastor, I want nothing to do with the building fund, but I want to give an impulsive gift to the back to school activity because I like the work that we're doing with young people. Right? And so it affords us that opportunity as a way to cultivate others, because we know that there are different individuals within our congregation that's listening and needing different things. Grace, come on in. You're muted, Grace.
Sorry, yeah. Just because this webinar is titled Preaching Generosity, I'm grateful for the generosity of culture in the church and how we do the year round. I appreciate that, all the data. But just a practical way of, is it any in your toolbox that help with the preaching generosity, specifically the preaching part? Any practical resources you have, just to point us geared towards that we'll use this fall right away?
Absolutely. So when Chip and I was working on this, I think last week I told him, I said, you know what? I go back and forth sometimes. I usually include a clip of me preaching as a part of this workshop. And I said, maybe I'll do it, maybe not. So I didn't know what the internet ability was going to be. So I didn't prepare that today. But Grace, thank you for asking that question. So I am, just from my own practice, I am a series preacher, right? That's what works for me. Because, you know, my life is a little bit crazy in doing some the work with Lake and having to run a congregation. So I have to think, you know, 2 months out, right? And so I will, I'm not as disciplined, to use the lectionary. I am a part of a denomination that we go by liturgical seasons, and so they're oftentimes aligned to the liturgical season. I just completed a series a couple months ago on what do you have, right? And I took 7 different texts from the woman that only had a little bit of oil, to the little boy that only had 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, to Moses only had a rod, and talk about what you have, and then that God can use what you have. It's not about the amount, but it's about the willingness of the heart, right? And it wasn't, I did a 7-part series, and it wasn't until we got to sermon 6 that I mentioned directly stewardship, right? And so, and because I've done the exegetical work of my congregation, I knew that if I started off with the word stewardship, and so we're going to do this for the next 7 weeks, that some folks will feel a little bit uneasy. Now, I'm like Chip, I have 0 issues in talking about money. You can see I've been talking for the last hour and 20 minutes, right? I have 0 issues in talking, preaching, and teaching about money. But I'm aware of the congregation in which I'm leading. And so to think about what might be helpful for you in building, if you're using a lectionary, if you're using the liturgical seasons, how do you build that in your season? I'll give another example. I was intending to share a major vision with our congregation at the beginning of the year about a major community involvement project that God has shared with me a year ago, right? And I waited, I sat on this, and pastors know this. You sit on the vision and you're like, what's the right time? What's the right time? What's the right time? And I was getting ready at the beginning of the year. It's like a new year. I'm going to, share the big vision. We had a leadership meeting at the end of November for 2025. And I was going to share it. And I was talking to a colleague and he said, no, you need to preach and teach through it first. So I engaged in, for the first 5 Sundays of the year, with our theme, and we do themes, yearly themes. We preached and taught around what God is calling us in terms of community engagement, right? Our call beyond the walls of the congregation. By the end of January, in my leadership team meeting, a couple of the leaders said, Pastor, we've heard your heart over the last 5 weeks. It sounds like God is really saying, as a congregation, we need to do some work around housing for our community, right? Literally had to preach and teach through it, right? So these are different ways in which, how do you onboard, we call it a runway, into the conversation around generosity? What text can you use to be able to support that as you are wrestling with it? But as I said earlier, some of that starts with you, Grace. You got to wrestle with your own comfort in talking about money. Right. Let me invite anyone else that might have some recommendations for Grace.
I've got some thoughts that I'd be glad to share, Grace, if you're able to stay at the end, that we can explore more deeply. I don't want to take away from others, but I did notice Bob Gustafson put a comment about using the word tithing, that we haven't talked about tithing in this, but at least among older members, it's part of the vocabulary. Bob, do you want to add anything to what you wrote in the chat?
Yeah, I would just add that tithing is often used as kind of a benchmark, a challenging one, but I would just ask kind of, where do benchmarks like tithing fall in your approach?
Absolutely. I want us to thank you, Robert, for asking that question. Let me invite the wisdom in the room. Where does tithing fall within this conversation around stewardship and generosity?
When I was serving in a church, I would always tell them we aspire to tithe. And I like the word aspire because it doesn't shame people if they don't do it. But that, and I had a couple actually that I was very surprised they weren't tithers already. They were very, very faithful people. And after they had been members like 4 years, the husband came and told me, you told us in the new members class that we are a church that aspires to tithe, and I want to let you know that we got there this year. And so they actually like lived into that language.
I like that setting a goal rather than, I think, if the statistics are right, that most people, even inside churches, give, 2 or 3 or maybe 5%, that setting, well, the minimum is 10%. You're just setting people up for failure and disappointment. That I could grow to 8.5% and I'm still lacking, rather than I've just doubled my percentage. And so, I think for those folks who are motivated by habitual and planned, yeah, a tithe is a great standard, but I think it becomes a barrier to, some of the other motivations.
It's also in the Bible, isn't it? Is it the 10% is in the Bible. But I think there should be a way to frame it so that it doesn't sound like you're forcing people to give their 10%. But I don't know what that raise would be like, because it's clear it's 10%. And it doesn't go up any higher like other interest rates. I think it's a good thing, but I don't know how it can be put, because it's hard to understand it, especially talking about your money, thinking in terms of, 20,000, so I give this much. But giving to God, you get it back. But I can't tell everybody you get it back without, I'd have to have my testimony, and I can't give it every Sunday. How do you do that? How do you deal with the fact that it's in the Bible?
So I'm loving this. Julie, I'm going to pull on you in about 2 minutes. I love this because we had this conversation for about 10 minutes last night around oftentimes when we think about tithing, there's a legalistic numbers that's associated with it, and some folks don't feel as comfortable talking about leaders. Is it 10%? Is it before or after taxes? Do you give God only 10%, or you give God from a place of generosity? Going back to Walter Brueggemann's space, that says that all of this belongs to God anyway, right? And how do you juxtapose and how do you justify the conversation that says, well, tithing is an Old Testament command and not in the New Testament? And so oftentimes when I share, Julie, I'll say, well, in the Old Testament, it says give 10%, but if you read the New Testament, it says bring all that you have. So then you get to decide, you're going to give the 10% or you want to bring it all, right? And so does that answer your conversation? But if we rest on what Brueggemann says, which is this belongs to God, and God has entrusted us as vessels with what belongs to him. The last slide that I was going to share was Walter Wilmer's stages of giving. And Walter Wilmer talks about leading and cultivating individual from a place of being an imitator in giving to be a mature steward, right? And there are 4 other steps between an imitator, a modeler, a conformer, a blessed individual, a generous giver, and then a mature steward. Ultimately, our desire is to cultivate individuals to the place where they are mature stewards, recognizing that all that I have it's been given to me by God and it belongs to him. And so how do I become this mature steward in what God has blessed me with? Right. Julie, come on in.
Yeah, I was going to actually give an example of a mature steward, the most mature steward that I've ever met, who had a dream that Jesus was sitting at the end of his bed and told him to, I think I've shared this story with you before, Chip, but Jesus was sitting at the end of his bed and said, I want you to give away 90% of your income. And he does that. Like this person still does that, and he does it from a place of, he's capable of it with the work that he does, but also that it's not his, it's God's. And that even after he gives it, he doesn't ask for I would, he's not in my congregation now, but I would give him updates on what happened with the money. But he was very clear that it's not under his control anymore. After he gives it, it's not it's like it wasn't his to begin with, and it's not his now. And so I always just think of him with that. But I also think about tithing, and like I struggle with it, asking people to tithe when like it's in an economy of such disparity between the rich and the poor. Asking for 10% means vastly different things for those who are extremely wealthy versus those who are barely getting by. And I think, yeah, I think that's what I struggle with the most when it comes to speaking to tithing. And yeah, I think I pull a Carlos Perkins and say, well, the New Testament says we give everything. So what do we think about that? That is definitely my go-to, but it feels like a little bit of a cop out, but you know what I mean? Like I do struggle with that.
We have a new phrase now, pull a Carlos Perkins. And I'm gonna close us off because we're out of time, and I like to be good about the time. But Carlos has told me he can stick around a little bit if you'd like to have a conversation with him. As I said earlier, I've got some specific thoughts about preaching about stewardship that could be helpful too. But I want to let's thank Carlos. So give him some happy hands. Thank you very much, Carlos, and let me close us in prayer. Gracious God, thank you so much for the gifts of Carlos and what we've learned. We pray that you will use this workshop to help our people and help us to be more generous. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Thanks everybody for coming.
Bye.